After rescuing a cowboy from wolves, a lonely girl never expected he would marry her. Eliza had lived alone for so long that silence felt like her only companion. Her small wooden cabin stood at the edge of a snowy valley, far from the nearest town. The people in town knew about her, but they rarely visited. Some said she preferred it that way. Others believed she had simply forgotten how to live among people. Every morning, Eliza woke up before the sun. She would step outside, wrap her coat tightly around herself, and look across the white valley. The snow covered everything like a soft blanket. It was quiet, peaceful, but also lonely. She had not always been alone. Years ago, her parents had lived with her in that same cabin. They had taught her how to survive in the wild, how to gather firewood, how to hunt, and how to stay safe during long winters. But after they were gone, the world became much quieter. Still, Eliza was strong. She did everything herself. She chopped wood, cooked simple meals, and kept the cabin warm. She spoke very little, but her thoughts were always busy. Sometimes she would sit near the window and watch the falling snow for hours. The only sounds that broke the silence were from nature. The wind through the trees, the crackling fire, and sometimes the distant howling of wolves. Most people feared the wolves, but Eliza did not. She respected them. She knew they were just trying to survive, just like her. As long as she stayed careful, they stayed away. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned orange and pink, Eliza was inside preparing her meal. Suddenly, she heard something unusual. It was not the wind. It was not the wolves either. It sounded like a shout. Eliza froze. She listened carefully. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Then she heard it. A faint cry, followed by movement in the snow outside. Her heart started beating faster. She quickly grabbed her lantern and her old rifle. It was not new, but it still worked. Taking a deep breath, she opened the cabin door and stepped outside into the cold air. The wind brushed against her face as she moved forward slowly. The snow beneath her boots made soft, crunching sounds. She followed the direction of the noise, her lantern lighting the path ahead. As she reached the edge of the trees, she saw something that made her stop. There, lying in the snow, was a man. He was barely moving. Around him, a few wolves stood at a distance. They were not attacking, but they were watching carefully. Their eyes reflected the light from Eliza's lantern. Eliza felt fear, but she did not step back. Instead, she raised her rifle and fired a shot into the air. The loud sound echoed across the valley. The wolves quickly turned and disappeared into the darkness, their shapes fading into the trees. Now, it was just Eliza and the stranger. She walked closer, her steps slow but steady. The man was unconscious, his clothes covered in snow. His face looked pale, and he was breathing weakly. Eliza knelt beside him. "Hey, can you hear me?" she said softly. There was no answer. She looked around. There was no one else. No horse. No supplies. Just him. For a moment, she hesitated. Bringing a stranger into her home was risky. She had always lived alone, and she did not trust easily. But as she looked at him lying there in the cold, she knew one thing clearly. If she left him, he would not survive the night. Eliza made her decision. With great effort, she pulled him up and began dragging him through the snow. It was not easy. He was heavy, and the cold made everything harder. But she did not stop. Step by step, she brought him back to the cabin. By the time she reached the door, her hands were shaking from the cold and effort. She pushed the door open and carefully brought him inside. The warmth of the fire slowly filled the room again. She placed him near the bed and quickly added more wood to the fire. Then she removed his wet coat and covered him with blankets. Eliza worked quietly but carefully. She cleaned his wounds as best as she could and gave him water, though he was still unconscious. Hours passed, the night grew deeper, and the wind outside became stronger. But inside the cabin, it was warm and safe. Eliza sat nearby, watching him. She did not know who he was. She did not know where he came from. But something about this moment felt different. For the first time in a long while, she was not alone in the cabin. As the fire crackled softly, Eliza looked at the stranger and wondered how his story had crossed her path, and how this unexpected meeting might change everything. The next morning, the valley was covered in soft sunlight. Snow sparkled like tiny stars under the bright sky. Inside the cabin, the fire was still burning, and the air felt warm and calm. Eliza woke up quietly, just as she always did. For a moment, she forgot that someone else was in the cabin. But then she turned her head and saw the stranger lying on the bed. He was still asleep. Eliza stood up slowly and walked closer. She checked his breathing. It was better than before, but still weak. His face had more color now, which gave her a small sense of relief. She moved back and began her morning work. She boiled water, prepared a simple soup, and cleaned the small space around her. Even though she was used to doing everything alone, she now found herself looking at the stranger again and again. Hours passed. By midday, the man began to move. At first, it was just a small movement of his hand. Then he slowly opened his eyes. The light from the window made him blink. He looked confused, as if he did not understand where he was. Eliza noticed immediately. She walked toward him but kept a small distance. "You're safe," she said in a calm and simple voice. The man tried to sit up, but pain stopped him. He let out a small breath and rested back again. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice weak. "In my cabin," Eliza replied. "You were outside, in the snow." The man closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember. Then slowly, he nodded. "My name is Caleb," he said after a short pause. "Caleb Ward." Eliza stayed quiet for a second. Then she said, "Eliza." There was a small silence between them. Eliza was not used to talking much, and Caleb could feel that. Still, there was something peaceful in her voice. It made him feel safe. "You saved me," Caleb said softly. Eliza looked away. "I just brought you inside." Caleb gave a weak smile. "That means you saved me." Eliza did not reply, but she placed a bowl of warm soup beside him. "Eat," she said. "It will help." Caleb slowly lifted himself and began to eat. Each movement looked painful, but he tried not to show it. Over the next few days, Caleb stayed in bed while Eliza took care of him. She changed his bandages, gave him food, and kept the fire burning. She spoke only when needed, but her actions showed care. Caleb, on the other hand, liked to talk. Once he felt a little stronger, he began sharing small stories. He told her about long rides across dry lands, about working with horses, and about the big open sky in the south. Eliza listened quietly. She had never seen those places, but she imagined them in her mind. His words painted pictures that made her world feel bigger. One afternoon, Caleb looked out the window and said, "This place, it's quiet." Eliza nodded. "It always is." "Don't you feel lonely?" he asked gently. Eliza paused. She did not answer right away. Then she said, "Sometimes." That was all. But for her, it was a lot. Caleb did not push further. He understood that her silence had meaning. Days turned into a week. Caleb slowly began to walk again, though his legs still hurt. Eliza helped him move around the cabin. Sometimes she showed him small things, where she kept her tools, how she stored food, and how she prepared wood for the fire. One day, Caleb laughed softly while watching her work. "You've been doing all this alone?" he asked. Eliza nodded. "You're stronger than most people I know," he said. Eliza looked at him, a little surprised. No one had ever said that to her before. That evening, something changed. Eliza sat near the fire as usual, but this time Caleb joined her. The room was quiet, but it did not feel empty. "I was heading north," Caleb said slowly. "Before everything happened." Eliza looked at him. "Why?" He thought for a moment. "I guess I was searching for something." "What?" she asked. Caleb smiled a little. "I'm not sure anymore." Eliza did not fully understand, but she felt something in his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt that someone understood her quiet world. Outside, the wind blew gently, and the valley remained calm. The wolves could be heard far away, their voices soft in the night. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. Not just from the fire, but from something new growing between two people who had once been strangers. Eliza looked at Caleb, and Caleb looked at her. Neither of them said it, but both felt it. Life was changing, and this was only the beginning. Winter had not yet ended, and the valley was still covered in deep snow. The days were short, and the nights felt long and cold. But inside the cabin, things had changed. Eliza was no longer alone. Caleb had grown stronger over the past days. He could now walk without much help, though his legs still hurt sometimes. He tried to do small tasks to help Eliza, bringing wood, fixing small things, and even cooking once, though Eliza quietly took over before he could burn the food. For the first time in years, laughter had entered the cabin. One morning, the sky looked different. Eliza stepped outside and looked up. Thick gray clouds covered the sky. The wind felt stronger than usual, and the air carried a sharp chill. She knew what was coming, a storm. She quickly went back inside. "Storm is coming," she said. Caleb looked at her. "Bad one?" Eliza nodded. "Very bad." They both began preparing. Eliza checked their food and water. Caleb helped bring extra firewood inside. They secured the windows and closed every small opening where cold air could enter. By evening, the storm had arrived. The wind howled loudly, shaking the cabin walls. Snow fell heavily, covering everything outside in a thick white layer. The world beyond the cabin disappeared. Inside, the fire burned bright, but the sound of the storm made everything feel uncertain. Eliza sat near the window, watching the snow. Caleb sat across from her. "You've seen storms like this before?" he asked. Eliza nodded. "Many times." "And you stayed here, alone?" he said. "Yes." Caleb looked at her with quiet respect. "You're braver than you think." Eliza did not answer, but his words stayed with her. As the night grew darker, a loud cracking sound suddenly echoed above them. Both of them looked up. Another crack followed. "The roof," Eliza said softly. Snow had begun to pile up heavily on top of the cabin. The weight was too much. Before Eliza could react, a part of the roof gave way with a loud crash. Snow fell inside, and cold air rushed in. Eliza stood up quickly, her heart racing. "We need to fix it," Caleb said. "No," Eliza replied immediately. "Too dangerous." But Caleb was already moving. "If we don't fix it, the whole roof might fall." Eliza stepped in front of him. "You're still hurt." "I'll be careful," Caleb said firmly. Eliza looked at him, fear in her eyes. She had just found someone after so many years. The thought of losing him scared her more than the storm. "Please don't go," she said quietly. Caleb paused. He had never heard her speak like that before. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. "I'll come back," he said gently. Before she could stop him, Caleb stepped outside into the storm. The wind pushed against him, and the snow made it hard to see. He climbed carefully, holding onto the edge of the cabin. His injured leg made every step harder, but he did not stop. Inside, Eliza stood near the door, unable to sit still. She listened to the storm, her hands tightly held together. Time passed slowly. Every second felt longer than the last. Finally, after what felt like forever, the door opened. Caleb stepped inside, covered in snow, breathing heavily. "It's fixed," he said with a tired smile. Eliza rushed forward. "You're freezing." She quickly helped him sit near the fire and wrapped him in blankets. She placed more wood in the fire and stayed close. For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm continued outside, but inside, there was silence again. Different from before. Eliza looked at Caleb. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. Caleb looked back at her. "I couldn't let anything happen to this place." Eliza shook her head. "Not the cabin." She paused. "You," she said quietly. Caleb was surprised. He saw something in her eyes that she had never shown before. Fear, not fear of the storm, but fear of losing him. Caleb's voice softened. "I'm okay." Eliza nodded, but her eyes stayed on him, as if she needed to be sure. That night, they sat closer than before. The storm slowly became weaker, and the wind began to calm. The danger had passed, but something else had changed. Eliza was no longer just a girl who lived alone in silence, and Caleb was no longer just a stranger passing through. Between them, something deeper had formed, something neither of them could fully explain, but both could feel. As the fire burned low and the night grew quiet again, Eliza realized something important. She was not afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of going back to that life. And Caleb was no longer just a part of her world. He had become the reason it felt alive again. Winter slowly came to an end. The heavy snow began to melt, and the valley started to change. Small streams of water flowed through the land, and the trees slowly came back to life. The cold wind softened, and the sky looked brighter each day. Inside the cabin, life had also changed. Eliza and Caleb had grown closer in a quiet and natural way. They worked together, shared meals, and spent long evenings talking by the fire. What once felt like a lonely place had now become warm and full of life. But Caleb knew something that Eliza did not say out loud. His journey was not meant to stop here. One morning, Caleb stood outside, looking across the valley. The snow was almost gone, and the open land stretched far ahead. His horse, which had survived and stayed nearby during the storm, stood not far from the cabin. Eliza stepped outside and saw him standing there. "You're leaving," she said softly. It was not a question. Caleb took a deep breath. "I have to go back someday." Eliza nodded slowly. She had expected this moment, but it still felt heavy in her heart. "This is your home," Caleb continued gently. "Your life is here." Eliza looked around the valley. For years, this place had been her whole world. It had protected her, But it had also kept her alone. Now, things were different. She looked back at Caleb. "It was my life," she said quietly. Caleb did not fully understand her words, but he could feel their meaning. They spent the rest of the day in silence, doing their usual work. But everything felt different. Every small moment seemed more important, as if time was moving too fast. That evening, they sat by the fire one last time. Caleb looked at Eliza. "You saved my life," he said. Eliza shook her head lightly. "You stayed." Caleb smiled a little. "Maybe I stayed because I needed to." Eliza looked into the fire. "Or because you wanted to." There was a quiet pause. Caleb stood up and walked toward the door. Eliza followed him outside. The sky was clear and the stars shone brightly above them. Caleb walked to his horse and placed his hand on the saddle. He looked back at the cabin, then at Eliza. "I've been riding for years," he said. "From one place to another. I never stayed too long." Eliza listened, her heart beating fast. "But this place," Caleb continued, "it's the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere." Eliza's eyes softened. Caleb walked toward her slowly. "And you," he said, "you're the reason." Eliza felt her breath catch. She had spent so many years hiding her feelings, staying quiet, protecting her heart, but now she could not ignore what she felt. "I don't want you to go," she said honestly. Caleb looked at her, surprised but happy. "Then don't send me away," he replied gently. Eliza stepped closer. "I won't." For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other. No fear, no doubt, just understanding. Caleb removed his cowboy hat and held it in his hands. Then he placed it gently into Eliza's hands. "I've been searching for something," he said. "I didn't know what it was." Eliza held the hat, her hands slightly shaking. "But now I do," Caleb added. "It's a home, a real one." Eliza smiled softly, her eyes filled with emotion. "And I found it here, with you." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Spring fully arrived, bringing warmth and new life to the valley. The cabin no longer felt like a place of loneliness. It had become a home filled with laughter, shared work, and quiet happiness. Caleb stayed. He repaired parts of the cabin, built new fences, and took care of the land with Eliza. Together, they created something stronger than before. The people from the nearby town slowly began to visit. At first, they were curious. Then they became friendly. Eliza, who once stayed away from everyone, slowly opened her heart to the world again. And one day, under a clear blue sky, something special happened. Near the cabin, surrounded by the beauty of the valley, Eliza and Caleb stood together. A small group from the town gathered around them. There was no big celebration, no loud music, just simple smiles and warm hearts. Caleb looked at Eliza, and Eliza looked at Caleb. No words were needed. They both knew. What started as a moment of rescue had turned into something much deeper. A bond, a promise, a new life. The valley, once filled with silence, now held something beautiful. A story of two souls who found each other when they least expected it. And in that quiet place between the hills, Eliza was never lonely again.